Hello and welcome to the Rebeccanomics vlog. Ahead of a series of interest rate setting decisions this week, I want to ask, is inflation really under control? The Fed, the Bank of England and the ECB are all making decisions about interest rates in the next 24 hours. The Fed is expected to start slowing the pace of rate rises, while the Bank of England is expected to increase rates by 0.5 of a percentage point and the ECB by as much as a 0.75 of a percentage point rise. So the big question is, are we finally bringing inflation under control, or do we still need to worry? If the mood music in Davos at the end of January and across financial markets is anything to go by, the answer is yes, and we can expect the pace of financial tightening to slow. However, I think there are still reasons to be cautious about whether or not inflation has peaked, and I want to explore a few of these. The first thing is, there are a lot of known unknowns at the moment in the global economy. An awful lot of economic water to pass under the bridge. The first is China. We don't really know whether or not the full opening up of the Chinese economy post-COVID is going to be positive. It should be. It should open up demand again. But it could take a while for manufacturing to pick up and supply chains to pick up as well, while the working population of China is exposed to the virus, has to take time off work. These are elements that we really don't know about at the moment. Second, the Russia-Ukraine crisis has had an impact on energy and food last year, and these prices appear to have settled. But we don't know, and perhaps we can't know, what the end game in Russia and Ukraine is going to be. We're expecting a renewed offensive in the spring, and that may affect grain shipments, and it may affect the long-term prices of oil as well. The war is, whatever happens, likely to be longer term and more protracted and attritional than we expected at the beginning, and that makes predicting a permanent drop in either energy or food prices at best unreliable. And finally, we really don't know the extent to which the world is going to dodge recession. The IMF was upbeat for everywhere except the UK yesterday at the end of January. But maintaining tight monetary policy for a long period of time increases the risks of self-imposed recession by making money expensive for ordinary people so that it's harder for them to pay costs of, for example, mortgages. The second big element of all of this is that global trade is itself generating inflation. So let's have a look back over what's happened since the Russia-Ukraine crisis. What we saw was that trade values jumped by as much as 50–60% in 1 month after the start of the crisis. But particularly, the prices went up in base metals such as cobalt, copper and nickel. Trade volumes didn't jump, so the increase in values represented inflation in key infrastructure, food and electronic sectors. And these are all supply chains that will be particularly affected by the crisis. Trade values in metals are still high, and that's affecting the price of trade finance in these sectors as well. We can expect trade values to be volatile for a period of time to come, given the uncertainties that surround the geopolitical situation and trade. This isn't just Russia, of course, but it's also the impact of anything that might happen in the South China Sea. Trade is also important as an indicator of inflation when we look at shipping prices. So shipping prices are still very high, and they've remained high in the wake of the pandemic. And IMF research suggests that the higher shipping costs in 2021 added as much as 2% to global inflation in 2022. In other words, the impact of high shipping costs are bigger and last for longer than anyone actually thinks. So there's something there that we need to be worried about. So the third thing is that, unfortunately, as an economist, I have to admit this, we tend to misread inflation. Remember, 2 years ago when any inflationary pressures were going to be transitory? Now, when I first started studying economics, the general mantra was that prices are always sticky downwards and inflation takes longer to bring down and is harder to get under control than everyone thinks. We seem to have forgotten that. This would happen under normal economic circumstances, but we're very far from that normal position. As I've already said, the known unknowns could drive inflation up as well as down during the course of the next year. Why? Because so many of the factors at the moment that are driving inflation are actually outside of the framework or even the remit of monetary policy. So just to summarise, it would be wrong to assume that inflation is inevitably going to drop during the course of 2023. We know this because there are still geopolitical and geoeconomic known unknowns. We know that trade values and shipping costs are still high. And we also know our own fallibility, in other words, the tendency to misread the origins of inflation. This is why you'll see a generally hawkish tone amongst policymakers as rates are set this week. But it's also why we may find economic conditions tougher than we think they are going to be as well. While interest rates and energy prices are high, it's consumers that will feel the pinch. So let's welcome the more positive tone of economic news at present for everywhere, if not for the UK. But let's also be aware that there's still a very long way to go. Ordinary people will suffer if monetary policy is too aggressive. And in the end, monetary policy can't deal with all the structural trade and geopolitical problems that the world currently faces. Thank you for listening.